All right. So speaking to you today for this 2022 INCITE Proposal Writing Webinar, there's me. My name is Katherine Riley. I'm the new INCITE Program Manager. Judy Hill left Oak Ridge. And I am the Director of Science for the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. And depending on your history, if you're not completely new to the program, I might have interacted with you previously. So hopefully I'm not a completely new face. Similarly, also today are two other folks from the Leadership Computing Facilities, Dima Bikoff from the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility and Marta Garcia from the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. And these two are helping lead our computational readiness review this year, but they're also going to help with the presentation. There's a lot of material. And so as a team today, we're going to be trying to bring you really the best practices that we have, right, about how to write an INCITE proposal. And really, the key things here are walking through the bulk of the proposal. As you'll see as we get there, if you haven't written one before, the meat of the INCITE proposal is the narrative, which is 15 pages. It's describing everything, right? Really, the science that you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to do it. And so this is really where we're going to talk a little bit about the content of that part of the proposal, but also learn some of the best practices and our advice about how to do that. And we'll also cover through this new things that are happening in the program this year. The quick overview for the timeline for everyone is that the proposals are due June 18th of this year. This is very similar timing to last year. Last year was June 19th. So there's no big schedule changes. It's all approximately in the same time frame. We'll notify those PIs of whether they're awarded or declined in November, and awards will begin January 1st of next year. So similar timeline as we have had historically. As I mentioned, we're going to spend a bulk of the time really talking about the project narrative, right, and what goes into that proposal, and new actually systems that are coming into the facilities for INCITE in this coming year. I will start things off though. I'll talk a little bit about the allocation programs at the facilities and the INCITE mission, some recent statistics, and some recent changes. And at the very end, actually, we'll also sort of just have a quick touch base on sort of the key things, like once you're done, you've written this proposal, you've got everything ready, just a couple things about getting your proposal submitted and how award decisions are made. Okay, so a few things that are new to the program. If you are not new, if you have been looking at the INCITE program before, I'm just going to lead off with a few things that are new or new-ish. One of them is that while this was new last year, it's not new this year. It's important. I want to remind people is that we actually need all of your submission materials in one file, sort of concatenated together. So this is all the different components that you're writing, like the project summary, your personnel justification, management plan, milestone tables, etc. We just need you to piece those PDFs together. A more substantive new change in this coming year is what we have called the early career track. And I'll touch back to this again later in the little bit of that I'm introducing here, but fundamentally, we've always tried to be encouraging of early career researchers in INCITE, but we really wanted to sort of make this explicit, make this very purposeful, and really try to encourage those early in their career, which we're defining as within 10 years from receiving their PhD. We really wanted to encourage those researchers to apply for INCITE if they had a research proposal that really needed it. So for the 2022 INCITE year, we are committing 10% of the allocatable time to an early career track. The goal is, as I said, just to encourage this next generation. Projects will still go through the regular merit review and this regular computational readiness review, all of which we'll talk about through this proposal. But we will consider those proposals separately if we need to. We'll say historically we've had really good success with some early career proposals being very competitive and meriting award without any special exception. But we're trying to make this sort of an explicit path for people to consider so that they understand they have a chance, right? And are willing to try to compete. since I've touched on almost everything regarding this, I will say that it's a pretty easy thing in order to do when you're applying. There's just a question in CureNet, which is when you're submitting the proposal, which is if you'd like to be considered, and then we just ask for a quick paragraph. And it really is meant to be a paragraph. You don't need to make a long paragraph here. It's trying to understand how this proposal fits into your 5 to 10 year career path, right? So how it fits in, perhaps, say, to your tenure track, if that's applicable, just as an example. Moving on, a couple other things that are new in 2022. There are some new resources coming online. This is a bit of a surprise, perhaps, to some people, that there will be a new resource available at the ALCF for INCITE in 2022. Currently, we expect that to be available, if not on January 1st, in the very early part of 2022. So we expect a full year. There are details about this later, and we'll get into them, but this is a hybrid CPU-GPU machine, and a large fraction of that machine will be committed to INCITE. Additionally, there is a new large file system at the ALCF that users of Theta will have access to, called Eagle and Grand. And again, we can talk about any questions you have associated with this, but if you are awarded a project at the ALCF on Theta, you will have access to this. You will be able to, we'll work with you on what your allocations are on it. But really, one of the key things about the file system, the new file system coming in, besides some performance capabilities, are also that they're designed for data sharing. And so if this is something that is a part of your research proposal, where you're considering either that data needs to be shared externally from people within your group, like outside of even the ALCF, Eagle might be a good target for you to consider. All right, so touching back into a little bit about the primary ways to access the ALCF and the OLCF, and so what our allocation programs are. For those new, it's important to understand that INCITE represents actually 60% of the total machine time available at both leadership computing facilities. So it's a very large fraction of the time. The other 40% is split between a program run by the Office of Science, by specifically OSCAR, the Leadership Computing Facilities sponsors, so that's called the OSCAR Leadership Computing Challenge. Unlike INCITE, it is a very mission-driven program, meaning Department of Energy mission-driven, and has some different characteristics, including that they tend to be one-year proposals. For the other 20%, this is director's discretionary, and so this is time that is for the leadership computing facilities to allocate. It is most often focused on strategic programs, proposal preparation, and things like supporting the exascale computing program. Okay, so we've talked about sort of this overview, but to specifically talk about what is INCITE. So INCITE, which is at this point nearing in on 14 years old, is the Innovative and Novel Computational Impact on Theory and Experiment. That's a mouthful, and and really what that was attempting to target when it was created, that acronym when it was created, is that INCITE's really focused on supporting transformational changes and advances in science and technology. And it's really looking for those high impact pieces of work that could not be done at other computing centers. And that might be because of the compute intensity of it or the data intensity. But fundamentally, really, as I said, we're looking for these high impact, potentially very high risk projects, and that need a very large fraction of resource in order to make progress. We have a long history of broad areas of science that we have been able to support. This is just a sampling, right? This is just an example of areas where we have had significant advances through the program over its history. It is not meant to be an exhaustive list by any stretch, nor is it meant to, encourage you to be like, well, do I fit into this? Because it's a much broader area that we touch on. And including things like, even supporting other government agencies, right? We've had projects that have successfully competed from NIST, where they were trying to improve the process, the composition of concrete and the reliability of actually mixing concrete. So it's a very broad area. And fundamentally, what I want you to take away from this is that almost certainly your area of research applies. And we really try over time to encourage new areas of research to come in, because that's pretty exciting for us. When we are evaluating projects or proposals for award, there are three primary areas. And in the end, the most important one is your merit criteria. So is this a campaign? Is this a project? Is this a chunk of work, right, that has a potential for significant impact, whether that's on your domain or a community impact? Like, and we sort of pull those words apart because sometimes it's, a specific advance, like you're looking to make a discovery or change the way people are thinking about something, but sometimes it's also like we need a huge database to be able to mine to answer this question, but we have to generate it, right? That's also a completely reasonable use case. We also look, when we're evaluating proposals, at the computational leadership criteria, also referred to in this talk as the computational readiness. So we're, in part, the computational readiness. We're really looking to determine whether you need a leadership computing capability in order to do your work. And in this case, as I said, it does not necessarily mean that you need just big flops. It might be that there's something specific to the architecture of machines that you need to use, or you need to have, you have a very large data need or a very large learning need that can't be satisfied anywhere. It might even be that, you're streaming data at such rates, right, that you need something to support that. So it's really looking at, first, that science impact, also that you need a large-scale system to do that, and then third is that you are eligible. And for the most part, the key thing here is that almost everyone is eligible. I will touch on the very few exceptions in the next few slides. Anyone can apply regardless of your funding source. So this does not mean that this means that you do not need to have Department of Energy funding or even US government funding or anything like that to apply for time. And non-US based researchers are absolutely welcome. So given that I'm going to talk to those first two criteria, and then I'll touch back on eligibility. As I said, we're looking at this leadership criteria, and then before that, we're looking at the scientific merit. And so this will give you some sense of the questions that are being asked in the review process. And I'll talk first about the new proposals, and then I'll talk about renewals and make a few comments there. For the merit, the scientific impact, every year we convene science panels. So this takes place in September. It has normally been in person, but of course last year and again this year, we're actually doing these remotely over video conferencing. But we convene science panels where we're really convening experts in a particular domain to talk about the proposals we have in that space and to help us evaluate their meritoriousness, but also help us rank them. And this will come up as we go forward. The primary question we are asking them is, what is the merit, the scientific or technical merit of getting this work done? We're also asking them to look, though, at the appropriateness of the methods that are being used, the milestones that are given, if they make sense. And this is even connected to the reasonableness of the requested resource. So remember that many of the people that are on these panels are experts in your field. They might not know the exact work that you are doing, right? But they might know the methods you're using. And so we ask them to sort of look at the amount of resources requested, and is that commensurate with the methods you're using? Is it commensurate even with the potential merit coming out of the proposal? And then we also look at the team qualifications, right? So are the right people on the team? Not only, are they the right, sort of experts to do this work, right? But do they have the right people in place, right? So if a single PI submits a proposal and it's this very large proposal with a lot of work, but they've only got, one person on the team, we might have questions about whether they are actually staffed and ready to do that work versus, if there's a very nice mapping of who's going to do what in the management plan and in the list of people involved. Then on the new proposal assessments, we look at the computational readiness review. So this is executed by the actual leadership computing facilities. So staff at both facilities read each proposal. And really, fundamentally, we're looking at, are you ready to go? If you're not ready to go on day one, how far away are you from being ready to go? And this is relevant both to whether your application that you're using or your data sets that you're using are there and ready, but also how experienced you are looking at using these resources. You do not need to have decades of experience using these resources to be ready, right? But for example, have you used a discretionary award at the facility that you're planning on using to actually ready yourself? We're also doing a check on the requested resources. Do all of the numbers make sense, right? If you're asking for more file system storage than we have actually at the entire facility, things like that, these sanity checks that all the numbers make sense. INCITE proposals can be 1, 2, or 3 years. So if you're writing a 1-year proposal, the next year you will be submitting a new proposal if you want to continue your work. But for 2 or 3 year proposals, you go through a slightly different track. You're still looked at by the peer review panels and in the computational readiness, but we ask some different questions. And the idea behind that is that you have already gone through the peer review process, deemed meritorious, deemed that we want to actually encourage this work over 2 or 3 years. And so when we come every summer to the renewal assessment, we are primarily looking for whether you have changed the scope of your work. So we're still asking the science panels, does this work still have merit? Are you meeting your milestones? But we also want to make sure that you are on track with the type of work that you originally proposed. And the reason behind that, right, is the merit of that work was originally evaluated and awarded. And sometimes stuff happens, right? And we understand this, right? Other things become priorities, or you discover something going along with your research and you have to shift gears. If there is a substantial change in scope, then sometimes these renewals are rejected, especially if there's not a strong justification for that change of scope. If you are a renewal proposal and you have worries about whether your change of scope, if there is a change of scope, feel free to reach out to me and we can work with you to help understand that. And I think honestly going in with the best understanding of where you think you might be and whether you're worried about that is actually a very strong position, and we can help you. On the computational readiness for renewals, it is primarily just a quick double check, right? Are they on track with where they said they were going to be technically? We thought they were going to be ready day one, or they said they were going to be ready day one, and they, if they were not, why? Does it make sense? And it's really just looking for we're sort of mining to make sure there are not any surprises or hidden problems that would prevent the project from moving forward. Often with the computational readiness with renewals, if there is a question, this actually triggers conversations with the specific project outside of the proposal process. And then finally, and I'll talk about this later in the webinar, but the award decisions are made by a committee comprised of the Leadership Computing Facility Directors, the INCITE program managers, and the directors of science from the facilities, along with some other senior management. The primary criteria when we're making those awards is looking at the most meritorious proposals, and then we make sure that those meritorious proposals are ready enough. And it's a balancing act there between making sure there's a diverse portfolio and that we have staff to help ready to go. And as I said, I'll talk more about that award decision process later in the webinar. As I mentioned, there are a few limitations on what can be done on the facilities. And really, in the end, federal law regulates what, I would say actually, perhaps more accurately, what cannot be done. Because we have cybersecurity plans, and that bounds the types of data that can be used and stored on them. So examples include, what's listed here on this slide. Like, for example, we cannot have personally identifiable information. We cannot have classified information. Anything about development of weapons or weapons of mass destruction cannot be on there. If you have questions about that and you think you might be touching on some of those, I would recommend reach out to me and we will work through answering that question. But in the end, it's not a question of can we make an exception? We normally cannot have this information on these facilities. A different category, though, is proprietary work. And this comes up every year. There are some really good questions about this. Proprietary use is really defined as using the compute facilities to generate data or results that the PI wishes to remain proprietary. So for us, what that means is you're not going to publish them in a journal. This is not going to be open science, right? And as a user facility, a national user facility, this is actually our mission, right? Our mission is to support open science. But we do have the allowance to allow some proprietary work. And in the end, the way that works is a full cost recovery. So if you really do need to have your work be completely proprietary, then there would be actually a bill associated with where normally there would not be at all. If you suspect that you might have a proprietary proposal, please reach out to the INCITE manager. Please reach out to me, and we will work through this. And one of the reasons is there's a lot of times where people think they might have a proprietary project and they don't. Examples of this would be, you have a proprietary application or even an export controlled software application. That might be something that we're completely able to accommodate because you're still going to be openly publishing your work afterwards. So this has been something that we have worked through with many projects. The other common situation that happens is for projects determine that, that they can actually publish some of the results of what they're doing, but sort of say with maybe a generalized geometry or something like that, right? So it can actually satisfy the open science need, but still allow some service to what the proprietary work might have needed. All right, moving on from there, but again, feel free to I think the proprietary topic generates a lot of questions because a lot of folks are using, especially software, that they might worry trigger that. So reach out to us if you have questions. Next, I wanted to touch on community versus umbrella proposals, and I will define what we mean in both of those cases. And we see a broad variety of proposals come through INCITE, right? There's one, you might, immediately assume and expect, which is the proposal from a research group, right? They have a specific question that they're asking and they want to tackle that. So it's kind of a single or at least very clustered topic that they're tackling. But we've also had two other categories of proposals. And so one of them is a community proposal. And this is a type of proposal where a community has come together, they have consensus on how to try to tackle the problem. They're all participating in pursuing and answering that problem. And normally they're really trying to address sort of some grand challenge, large scale science problem, which is why they've come together as a community. INCITE supports community proposals. And this is really demonstrated in sort of how those proposals are written, which is that, here's this large question we as a community are trying to answer, and here's how we're going to tackle it. So those types of proposals are encouraged. The type of proposal we do not encourage as much are umbrella proposals. And to differentiate this, these tend to be proposals where you might share an area of research or perhaps a common method that you're using, but the proposal itself isn't necessarily tightly coupled like you might see in a community proposal. It's not that there's a single grand challenge necessarily that you are trying to address. And the reason that these are discouraged is that they're very hard to evaluate. They're very hard to compare against community, but also against, say, single topic problems. And the way you might think about this is an umbrella proposal might have 6 sub-problems that they're trying to tackle. And so that 15-page of scientific narrative is split between all 6 of those different problems. And so you're not able to go into the same level of depth. And so you've got the peer panel trying to compare this much smaller chunk of information, perhaps with another proposal that's going into depth on one of those 6 things. And they've spent 15 pages talking about how they're going to tackle it. And those become very difficult to evaluate fairly without bringing in a lot of external knowledge about how people might be doing things or might not. And that's not how we want to be able to do the proposals. So we generally do not encourage umbrella proposals, but we have absolutely supported them historically, and this is the challenge we have found in the review process. Community proposals, we do encourage. So to talk a little bit about some statistics, to give you a sense of how many projects are applying and and what the rate of acceptances are. So these are some statistics from last year. So from the 2021 INCITE year, so the current year going on. For that year, if you looked at all of the proposals, the resources were 3 and 4.5 times oversubscribed, just based on requests. And this is looking at 60% of the total time on Summit and Theta being awarded. A total of 51 projects were awarded, 17 of which were renewals. But I think perhaps most interesting to people is that of the non-renewals that were submitted, so new proposals last year, 35% were accepted. They were from a broad range of areas. This is on the pie chart on the right. You can see clearly 55% were from universities. Government here, I think national labs in many cases. 9% were international, and a smaller slice, 4% with industry. And this provides a little bit more of a deep dive into the statistics on the proposals that were accepted. There were 41 total projects on Summit, 16 on Theta. You might notice that does not sum up to 51, and this is because you are allowed to ask for time on both resources. And so there were 6 projects that received time on both Summit and Theta. You'll also notice that actually the average and the median project sizes on both systems are actually very similar. So Summit's average and median are very similar, and Theta's average and median are very similar. And so what this is trying to say is that actually most of the projects were actually, of that 1.2 million size as on Theta and 470K size on Summit. So these are all on native node hours. So this would be Summit node hours and Theta node hours. And this is actually looking 2 years back on some new proposal statistics, but this is, I believe, still reflective in the 2021 year and as it has been consistent over INCITE, which is that we have a large number of new PIs that are successfully able to lead proposals each year. So this is not the same sort of PIs every year. We have new sort of folks coming in and being very competitive and being capable of receiving an award. Our science panels, as I mentioned, these are made up of experts from around the world. And I would say even last year, it became easier to accommodate that around the world, right? Because you're not asking somebody or as many people to fly from Japan, for example, to Washington, D.C. And so people were it was a lot easier for people to participate. This is a diverse set of panels with 78 science experts from across the large area of HPC, including universities and industry, international government agencies, with pretty prestigious careers behind them. And I'll say that we try to have some carryover, a significant carryover from year to year, so that there's a memory. And this is relevant, right? And sort of one, tracking how projects that are going through renewals are doing, but it also helps kind of keep things on track and understand, how well the panels are working. There are also, I will say, you can imagine we're collecting experts to look at particular proposals in an area of material science or chemistry. But the past few years, we've also had a panel to look at proposals that have a strong AI or learning component or data component. And the reason we have this this panel, is to really evaluate if our science panel doesn't quite yet have the expertise in the learning to determine whether this learning technique makes sense. The learning panel is sort of a secondary and supplemental panel to sort of look at that technique and determine, is this an appropriate technique? Is it an innovative technique, right? Does it add even more merit? But that is something that has been new in the past couple years. I talked about the early career path earlier. I wanted to repeat it again so people were aware of it. So just to repeat in case people came in later, we are looking to explicitly support early career researchers. We're committing that 10% of time to early career researchers who have meritorious proposals. And it should be a pretty easy application process. We are not asking people to jump through hoops in order to apply. So if you are within 10 years of your PhD, consider it. It's a checkbox and a paragraph saying, this is why it's relevant to, my career. Please help me. And while I mentioned this earlier, yes, this actually could increase your chances of getting an award. We are considering them separately. While we're still looking at meritorious proposals and the most meritorious ones coming out of a panel, we are going to have a separate conversation about those early career path proposals.